I'm Barry Gordon.
And I'm Andre Coleman.
And we'll introduce the guy in the middle in a minute. This is NewsRap, live at 5. Hey, Dre, it is good to be back.
Great to be back. But one thing.
Yeah.
Real quick. Yeah. How many times am I going to have to see that opening clip of me with the fro when we do this show? When are they going to sub that damn thing out, man?
Until they change it. I know. I know. It's archival now. You can't, I don't think you can, I don't think you can get rid of it. But it's good to be back. I had a wonderful road trip for 10 days to go see my son get married in Ohio. Good. We stopped at all kinds of wonderful places, a lot of those places, no one was wearing masks, and that was a little scary. But all the hotels, people were, and, behaving. So that was good. But we have a special show today. We have an hour show, first of all.
All right.
And we have a very special guest to help us today, because what we're going to do is, as we did, 2 years ago, we're going to go through the propositions. We want to give you all help in doing that. I will tell you, my disclaimer is that we shouldn't be doing this, and we shouldn't be having these propositions. I do not believe that we're equipped to vote on most of this stuff, and I've been saying that for years, and I will continue to say that. But here we are. We've got to vote on.
So you think this is the legislators' way of getting the people to do their job? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think it's pseudo-democracy. I think it's pseudo-democracy because, first of all, yes, we're second-guessing the legislators that we vote for, and I don't like that idea. And much of the time, we're looking at competing ads from competing special interests. Yeah. And, we don't really know the impact that it's going to have, but we have some help because we are stuck with this. We do have to vote on these propositions. And so we figured we better have someone help us through all of this. And we have the perfect person. And he's a professor of political science at Occidental College, an author. He's written, I think, half a dozen books. He's a frequent writer for the Huffington Post, for The Nation, for the LA Times. And so we're so pleased to have Peter Dreier with us. Peter, thank you for coming and being part of this.
Great, my pleasure. Good to see you, Andre. Good to see you, Barry.
So we're going to take the hour. We're going to start with the state props, and probably halfway in, we'll also add in the local initiatives that are good that we're going to have to vote on. And hopefully you have this book, which is the official voter information guide. So we're going to get started. We're going to do it in an interesting way. There's a great little piece on Cal Matters where they do they explain each proposition in less than a minute. So we thought that might be a good foundation. And then if you guys don't feel you need any more, you can go watch the Dodger game. But if you want to watch more, we're going to go into more detail on almost each of them. So let's run that.
Proposition 14 in less than a minute. Vote yes if you want California to keep funding stem cell research. Vote no if you don't.
Prop 15 in a minute.
Vote yes if you want commercial properties to be taxed based on today's mostly higher market prices. Vote no if you want to keep things the way they are.
Prop 16 in under a minute.
So, vote yes if you believe California should again allow for affirmative action. Vote no if you don't.
For Prop 17 in under a minute.
Vote yes if you think people who have served their prison sentence but are still on parole should get to vote. Vote no if you think people should wait until after they've completed their parole to be able to vote.
About Proposition 18 in under a minute.
Vote yes if you want eligible 17-year-olds to get a jump start on the voting process. Vote no if you want to keep things as they are. Voting starts at 18.
Prop 19, the Portable Property Tax Break Initiative, in 1 minute.
So vote yes if you think older Californians should keep their low property taxes when they move. Vote no if you think they shouldn't, and that Californians should not have to pay higher taxes for what they inherit.
And this is Prop 20 in a minute. So vote yes if you want to increase penalties for some property crimes and make it harder for some inmates to qualify for parole. Vote no if you want to keep things the way that they are.
I'll explain Prop 21 in under a minute.
Vote yes on Prop 21 if you want your city to be able to expand rent control. Vote no on Prop 21 if you don't.
Prop 22 in under a minute.
Vote yes on Prop 22 to allow gig companies to limit contractors' benefits. Vote no if you think gig companies should treat and pay drivers like employees.
Prop 23 in a minute.
So vote yes if you want the state to add more requirements for dialysis clinics. Vote no if you don't.
Prop 24 in less than a minute.
Vote yes if you want to change California's privacy law, and vote no if you don't.
Prop 25 in under a minute.
So vote yes if you want the state to switch from cash bail to a risk-based algorithm. Vote no if you want the state to keep the system as is, or you're waiting for a better solution.
So there it is. Now you know exactly what you need to know.
All of it, right there.
All of it. You want to keep things the way they are or change them. That's basically what propositions do. But we're going to talk a little more deeply about who these propositions affect. So Peter, it's interesting because I mean, you've always been pretty supportive of bonds, certainly for schools and water and, and the environment and so forth. But I understand that you're not in favor of Prop 14. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, Prop 14 would extend this state program to do stem cell research. And I'm clearly in favor of stem cell research. It's important. But there's no reason for California to do it on its own. When they first adopted this idea of a state agency to do stem cell research, the George W. Bush administration had banned stem cell research because of their opposition to abortion, basically. And then the Obama administration reversed that. And so the federal government now has a robust program of research on these issues that help to deal with Alzheimer's and diabetes and other issues around various genetic diseases. And so there's really and the Trump administration, for whatever reasons, hasn't reversed the Obama administration.
That's amazing.
I know. He's trying to reverse it.
I just thought that was a reflex. I didn't understand.
Either he forgot about it or he hasn't gotten around to that one.
Yeah.
So the federal government's doing what it's supposed to do on this, and there's no reason for the taxpayers of California to do it.
What's really interesting about that one was Nancy Reagan opposed Bush when he wouldn't do it. Yeah. And then she supported Obama when he did do it. And it may be the only thing that Nancy Reagan really pushed for with the Obama administration was stem cell research.
Very true.
Yeah, and that had probably something to do with the fact that her husband had Alzheimer's.
Completely. Yeah.
By the way, folks, if you want to get in on this conversation and ask questions of Peter or any of us, you can do that on Facebook just by making a comment on Facebook, and we'll be taking your comments throughout the show if you have any. But we're going to have a few. So Prop 15. Now, the impression that we're getting is that Prop 15, and I'm going to be very frank about this, is bad for Black people. When I watch the ads, I'm seeing that it's bad for Black people. The no on 15 people, and I think that's because of a lady named Alice Huffman. Who is Alice Huffman? Tell us about her a little bit.
Yeah. So Alice Huffman is the president of the state NAACP. So you would think she'd be liberal and in favor of things that support the interests of African Americans in California. But in fact, she's a corporate lobbyist. She has a consulting firm. she gets money from big business. They pay her for doing ads against Prop 15, against Prop 21, which we'll talk about rent control. She's even against the proposition that would eliminate cash bail. And then she sort of uses her brand as the president of the NAACP to get the NAACP, the state NAACP, not the local branches, to take the same positions as corporate California, which is antithetical to what's in the interest of most Black people, not all, but most. So she's basically, a corporate whore, basically. And she should be, I would like to think that the NAACP, at least its branches, would depose her, because she's really awful. I mean, she's a corporate lobbyist parading as a civil rights activist.
Well, there's a board, right? There's a state board for the NAACP.
Yeah.
So have they voted to support her positions on these props?
I think she controls the board, from what I'm told by my friends in the NAACP. She, most of them were appointed to the board because of her. So, anyway, but you know what? What's important is to understand what Prop 15 does and why it's important to vote yes, and to not be fooled by the corporate propaganda. And here's the problem for a lot of the propositions we're going to talk about. When you ask people, do you support Prop 15 on the polls, which they've done, Prop 15 would raise taxes on the biggest corporations, the property tax, on the biggest corporations in California. Corporations over $3 million, and it would raise between, depending on the year, between $7 and $12 billion a year that would go to support local schools and local services to address issues like infrastructure, clean water, housing and homelessness, healthcare, things like that.
And again, this does not repeal Proposition 13 for homeowners.
No, so
at all,
no.
Or renters, or even renters.
That's right. It would have no impact on homeowners or renters. What it would do, right now under Proposition 13, big corporations, let's say Disneyland. Disneyland is paying roughly the same property taxes it paid in 1978 when the voters supported Prop 13. Shell Oil, Hilton Hotels, some of the biggest corporations and property owners are paying under Prop 13 the property taxes that they paid when the law was first passed, and they don't get.
So it makes them pay their fair share.
They're not paying their fair share. So this closes the loophole for the biggest corporations in California who've been getting away with murder since 1978. It's basically getting them to pay their fair share, as Andre said, but it won't touch homeowners. It won't touch renters. There's even a tax break for small businesses, right? So it's completely progressive. And the polls show that people are in favor of it. But the biggest businesses and corporations in California are going to spend at least $100 million, probably more than that, on propaganda, including paying Alice Huffman. But that's just one part of their propaganda campaign, to persuade us with their lies, right, that this will hurt homeowners and this will hurt small business. And it won't. It's incredibly important. California is 41st in the country in how much we spend on students in our public schools. We're last in the country on how much we spend on things like librarians and guidance counselors and school nurses. And so it's really important that we improve our public schools. And, we used to have the best public schools in the country back in the 60s and 70s. And now we have some, among the worst. And it's really unfair to all students that go to public school, but particularly students of color and children of immigrants who really need to get a lift out of the public school system. And this would do that, and it would make, the Disney Corporation pay for better schools and better water and better housing and so forth. So it's $11 billion a year. So the B is a big lift, but it's really important that we do it.
And again, it only really affects the high end. It does not affect homeowners. It does not affect renters. It does not affect small businesses. So it sounds to me like it's something we should do.
Even among
to key in on what Peter just said is, if you are willing to spend $100 million not to have the tax increase, so you have $100 million thrown out there on an ad campaign, then you can afford the tax increase.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And they should have been paying for schools all along, to be honest with you, because of the money they make. So this just brings things into balance as far as I'm concerned.
That's right. Yeah.
And especially Disney ought to be paying for schools. Yeah. Darn it.
Come on.
Well, all the money they get from kids, come on, give it back.
That's exactly what I was going to say. You know how many of those kids went to see Marvel movies? Think about that.
Right. Give it back.
That's right. Yeah.
Let's do a march. Give it back, march. Give it back, Disney.
So it closes a loophole. Is what it does, really.
Yeah, exactly. All right, 16. Now, 16's interesting. 1996. Back then, we had a fellow named Ward Connerly, and he supported a proposition called 209, which basically got rid of affirmative action in education, in employment. And it seems like 16 wants to repeal 209. Is that the gist of it?
Yeah, Prop 16 would basically say that California, in its universities, for example, and colleges, can use race and gender and other criteria like that in deciding who gets in. It doesn't mean that people who don't deserve to get to college get to go to college. We have an affirmative action program in America right now for rich white people. Donald Trump got into University of Pennsylvania because his family bribed the university, right? And we all know about this college admissions scandal over the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. So, wealthy students get to take all kinds of like Kaplan courses, that are very expensive to help them improve their SATs. So we have affirmative action. George Bush got into Yale on affirmative action. His father went to Yale and his grandfather went to Yale. That was affirmative action for rich white guys. So this basically says we need to level the playing field. And in this era where everybody is talking about institutional racism and the need to address the issue of institutional racism, leveling the playing field by giving people, an opportunity to go to college, or to get contracts from local government, people that have, who have been the victims of historic discrimination. We should deal with that. This is not reparations. This is fairness. And so
I agree.
So everybody should vote yes on Prop 16 because it's fairness. It's about fairness.
We have a couple of props also about voting. And I think that's 17 and 18. Am I right about 18? Yes, I am.
Yep.
So a couple of them. One, right now, what is the rule in California for prisoners, parolees, and so forth?
Parolees can vote, basically. And but interestingly, they can serve on juries, right? So
and they could be drafted if there was a draft.
Yes, exactly. So, if you're out of prison or out of jail on parole, why take your constitutional right to vote away? Some people think that voting is a privilege. No, it's a right. Yep. We do take it away for some people, including prisoners, but in some states, not here in California. But so it's basically another issue of fairness, right? That
it's not fairness; it's Jim Crow. It's just straight racism and Jim Crow. Yeah. This is a way
restoring
when the
voting
vote was given. that people said we can always take the, exactly. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, I'm a yes on Prop 17 person to restore voting rights to Californians who are on parole. If you can get drafted, if you can serve on a jury, it's not like you voluntarily serve on a jury. You're mandated to serve on a jury. Then, you should have a right to vote. In fact, serving on a jury is usually among registered voters, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's who gets to serve on a jury.
Yeah.
But ironically, people on parole that don't have the right to vote can still be demanded to serve on a jury. So, so this would restore voting rights to about 50,000 people in California who are now on parole.
And I said initiative, but this is a legislative constitutional amendment. And so is 16, by the way. And if you go through the packet, and I guess this is what bothers me about all of this, is if you go through the packet, you see that overwhelming vote for 16, for 17, for 18. And why do we have to vote on these things? I don't understand. We elect a legislature. They make decisions. I just don't understand why we have to vote on these things. You want to explain that, Peter?
Well, let's go back to Hiram Johnson was the governor.
Oh, I know, the progressive era, yeah.
Back in the early 1900s. And
Yeah.
back then, Standard Oil and the Southern Pacific Railroad and a few other big corporations ran Sacramento. They ran the state government.
Mm-hmm.
So there were reformers, progressive reformers, that said the voters are being shut out of decision-making by big business. And so Hiram Johnson, the progressive governor, said, we got to deal with this. And so he advocated that the voters ought to have a direct role in passing legislation if the legislature is in the pockets of big corporations. And so that's why we started all these propositions. It was supposed to be a form of more popular democracy.
Right.
That has been somewhat distorted in the last 100 years because, as we've already talked about with Prop 15, big corporations put a lot of money into, opposing or supporting pro-corporate propositions. But even with that, sometimes you get a grassroots movement, as we're seeing here in California with like Prop 15 and some of these others, where you can basically, even if you can't raise a lot of money, you can door knock and talk to your, basically unions and community groups, environmental groups, prison reform groups. They can overturn or contest what the big corporations are doing. And so I agree with you in theory, Barry, that it'd be nice if we had, we have a Democratic governor, a Democratic legislature. They should be doing the right thing by the people. They're doing better than they did 10 years ago. But the governor, last week or 2 weeks ago, the governor vetoed a very important bill that would have given hotel workers the rights to get their jobs back after the pandemic. Why did he do that? Because the whole hotel industry, the restaurant industry lobbied him, right?
Yeah.
So, and he vetoed it. It passed both houses of the state legislature. And so, democracy is complicated.
It is, but when I think of grassroots in California history, I think of 209, I think of 187. I think of things that basically were AstroTurf campaigns that were really supported by people that didn't have enough political power, but had enough economic power to put certain things on the ballot.
That's often the case, but there's also been, you're not using the counter examples of where progressives have won statewide ballot measures. Back in the 60s, the voters voted to eliminate racial discrimination in housing. We were the first state in the country to do that. The real estate industry tried to stop it, and the voters won. And ever since then, there have been taxes on millionaires for public education that the voters supported. The voters have defeated corporate-sponsored legislation to weaken unions here in California, and so it's not totally one-sided. Although in an ideal world, we'd elect people, they'd advocate for what's best for the common good. They sometimes do, and they sometimes don't. So this is a kind of an escape valve for democracy.
Yeah. Even
if it doesn't always work.
Well, I think one thing about good democracy is that if one side has a say or a vote, the other side has a say or a vote, and it doesn't always turn out the way that we want it to turn out, and that's been somewhat now log jammed with money and lobbyists, like you pointed out.
Yeah.
But the people can get things done if the people come out and vote, and if the people come out and campaign, and if they push the right way, things can get done.
Yeah. There is a wonderful grassroots movement in favor of Prop 15. It's called California Calls. Lots of community groups, lots of ordinary people, workers are, I get a couple of phone calls a week telling me to vote yes. I also get an enormous amount of mail from big corporations. Or they don't say, we're a big corporation, please protect our profits. They try to make it sound like they're, supporting the average person. But, Prop 15 has been in the works for a couple of years. People have been planning this. And, Prop 13, the bill, the proposition from 1978, really has destroyed a lot of the public services in California, including public schools. And this would be a way to help restore them without increasing any taxes on working people that own their homes or renters. And so, let's do it. It's time. It's way overdue. We've been subject to Prop 13 and the corporate giveaways for just too long.
And isn't our friends, the Howard Jarvis Association, that was responsible for Prop 13, aren't they back again with another initiative this time, or are they just opposing things?
They're just opposing things. Yeah. They don't have the clout they had before. I mean, they're kind of a, they're kind of a fly on the body politic.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. One more, and then we're going to go to take a look at the local brief. But 18 was the other voting proposition, and that again started by the that's a legislative constitutional amendment, and it's just really a little tiny tweak from the way I read it, which is that you can vote when you're 18. And this would say that if you're going to be 18 by the time of the general election, let's say November, you can vote in a primary or a special election if you're 17, but before that, right?
Yeah.
Is that basically what it is?
Yeah, the important thing here is that voting is a habit.
Mm-hmm.
The younger you start to vote, the more likely you are to continue to vote. And so, if you're in high school and you're 17 years old and there's a primary election, you're going to be 18 by the November election. Let's get that habit going early. And
it seemed to me that the argument against it was kind of odd. Basically saying they have no real world experience. Are we really going to say that someone who's 17 and a half has less real world experience than someone who's 18? I really didn't understand that argument at all.
Well, that's not a real argument, Barry. That's an argument by right-wing conservative people that know that young people are more likely to vote for liberal politicians and Democrats, and so they want to keep them from voting. Right?
Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. They're one of the people that's doing that. They're afraid that we're going to do something dramatic like we want to do in Prop 15.
In this
all right, let's go to go ahead, Peter, and then I'll go to
this time of pandemics. We all have to wear a mask, but these corporate lobby groups, they wear masks too. They mask what they're really about, right?
That's
Their
right.
profits and their privilege, and they come up with all these bogus arguments to try to fool us into thinking that, young people shouldn't vote because they don't have real world experience when they're, it's like voter suppression. They're basically into voter suppression.
Right.
Nicely said, Professor Dreier. I love that. All right, we're going to go to the news brief, the local brief, whatever we're calling it today. Go ahead.
This is your local news brief for Friday, October 23rd, 2020. The city of Pasadena has reported 2,721 total confirmed COVID-19 cases and 129 COVID-related deaths. That's an increase of 48 new cases in the last week, but no new deaths. As of Tuesday, Huntington Hospital had 22 COVID-19 patients. County public health officials announced on Wednesday that rules requiring a 24-hour reservation for outdoor wineries and breweries would be eliminated. A health order that would allow tattoo, massage, and other personal care services to reopen indoors with restrictions is also expected. The updated guidelines and health order could be in effect as early as today. Pasadena voters will have the chance to vote on Measures J, P, and O on the November ballot. Measure J, also known as the Budget Allocation for Alternatives to Incarceration Charter Amendment, would permanently allocate 10% of LA County's unrestricted funds for community investments and alternatives to incarceration, such as youth programs, mental health services, job creation, and affordable housing. The measure is endorsed by the LA Times, local publication Colorado Boulevard, the LA County Democratic Party, and YWCA of Greater Los Angeles. It is opposed by Pasadena Star News, LA County Supervisor Catherine Barger, the Association of LA Deputy Sheriffs, and Local Firefighters Union 1014. Measure P, if approved, will allow the annual transfer of $18 million from the city's utility fund to the general fund. Money from the general fund is used to support services such as emergency response, community health, street repairs, senior programs, and homeless services. It is endorsed by both mayoral candidates, Terry Tornick and Victor Gordo, and Annie Miskey, CEO of Union Station Homeless Services. The measure is opposed by a group of residents that sued the city over the measure. Measure O supports the authorizing of PUSD to issue up to $516.3 million for a general obligation bond for facility upgrades and improved student access to science, technology, engineering, arts, and math courses. Supporters of Measure O include PUSD board members Scott Phelps, Elizabeth Pomeroy, Michelle Richardson Bailey, Roy Bulgorgian, former executive director of the Pasadena Educational Foundation, Joan Favre, and local filmmaker Pablo Morales. Opponents of the measure are the Pasadena Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, former councilmember Paul Little, retired PCC Dean S. Crystal Watson, and PCC Foundation Advisory Board member William Opal.
All right. Well, we'll get to the letters in a minute. We're going to stay with the numbers for a bit, and then we'll get to the local measures because there's a lot to say on those too. 19, we're up to 19, and 19 is basically some more changes in what Prop 13 wrought, but this time I think it kind of loosens it a little bit. It allows homeowners now to be able to apply the property tax base that they had before to a new home now, regardless of the cost of that home and anywhere in the state. Is that sort of what it is?
Yeah, right now, if you are over 55 and you sell your home and you buy a new home, you pay the same property taxes on your old home.
Right.
If you lived in that home for a long time, you're not paying much in property taxes. And so, that's I guess that's reasonable. Doesn't help renters, and it doesn't help homeowners that have just bought their homes and have to move again. But what this does is it says you can do that 3 times. You can move and buy a new house 3 times, not just one time. If you're over 55, and you still pay the extremely low property taxes you're paying before, and it really widens the gap between generations, because this only helps people over 5. So it's basically an accumulation of wealth by older homeowners. And you can imagine who's in favor of this, although they don't make the, they don't explain why. It's the realtors, right?
Yeah.
They want to sell more homes.
Right.
Right. And so
the only thing, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here, because I'm also looking at the legislative analyst's estimate, and it says local governments could gain tens of millions of dollars of property tax revenue per year if this passes. And it could grow over time to a few $100 million per year, and that schools could gain tens of millions of dollars of property tax revenue per year, and that revenue from other taxes could increase. So, and most of that would be spent on fire protection. So there is seemingly an argument that this is a revenue maker for the legislature.
Well, not if people are paying the low taxes that they were paying on their original home. If people had to pay the normal taxes on the property taxes when they bought a new home for the second and third time, that would be more money for the public, for the government. So that seems to be another one of those masks that the realtors are wearing to try to fool us into thinking that, this is good for the public sector and good for everybody, and school children and teachers. The teachers union's against this, right? So,
yeah,
you think if it's good for public schools, they'd be for it.
Yeah, I'm just confused why the legislative analyst would be saying that. Do we know anything about the legislative analyst?
You got a D in math, I think.
Because the people that are for it, I mean, the California professional firefighters are for it. I don't know, Peter, because this says that Howard Jarvis is against it. So if they're against it, I don't know. I'm kind of, I lean toward anything that Howard Jarvis is a taxpayers association.
Okay, but sometimes people are right for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, could be. That's why these things are complicated, folks. Yeah. And that's why I think we shouldn't be voting on. Perfect example of why we probably shouldn't. Okay, 20. Restricting parole for certain of this is a toughening crime thing, right?
Yeah.
And this is an initiative that was put on the books by who? Let's see. It was put on the books by victims, by crime victim associations.
Yeah,
then it's also opposed by crime victim associations.
Yeah,
so
this is a this is really put on the ballot by the police unions, basically.
Okay.
You know how much they're concerned with the public interest.
Yeah.
It basically says, so a couple of years ago, the voters voted for Prop 47 and 57. It basically said, if you've committed a minor felony, you shouldn't have to go to jail, right? Or and so there are a lot of people who thought, and there's a lot of evidence that worked pretty well. There hasn't been an increase in crime as a result of it. And this basically restores some of the low-level crimes and says you got to go to jail. And it increases the penalties for these low-level offenses. It would also create a state database of DNA, which is really a violation of people's civil liberties, of people convicted of specific misdemeanors. I meant misdemeanors. So anyway, so it just seems like these low-level offenses, we shouldn't, if we're concerned about mass incarceration,
right?
We should vote no on this.
Yeah, this sounds like a prison system, gift. That's what it sounds like.
It is a way to put it. It is a way to put more people into the system.
Yep,
absolutely.
That's what it is.
Yep.
It's to put more people in jail, and it would reclassify, let's say, theft between $250 and $950 as a felony, right? Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, you don't really want those people going to jail for a long time. So the law enforcement industry is behind this.
Yeah.
Including the prison industry,
Mm-hmm.
for-profit prison industry.
Yeah,
So,
I would think especially. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we're up to two very big ones. And I don't know if we're going to have time to cover everything, but we've got to cover these two and the local ones briefly. So 21 and 22. Now, last time Peter was on with us, he talked about rent control. And there was a lot going on at that time here locally in Pasadena. So tell us about 21 and how does 21 impact us locally?
Okay. So Prop 21 says we're going to change the state law to give local governments the permission to enact rent control laws. It doesn't require rent control laws. If Pasadena or Arcadia or any other city wants to have rent control, they can now have it. If they don't want to have rent control, they don't have to do it. But what it does is it makes the rent control law they can have be more effective, right? So under the current law, which is called the Costa-Hawkins Act, passed in 1995, if a city wants to have rent control, it can't impose rent control on any building built after 1995, when Costa-Hawkins was first passed. And most importantly, once a tenant leaves an apartment, the landlord can raise the rent to whatever the hell he or she wants. And what does that do? That encourages landlords to harass tenants illegally, to force them out. If they've lived in an apartment for 10 or 15 years, and their rent is being regulated on an annual basis, the landlord, most landlords would like to get rid of them so they can bring in somebody and charge the market rent. So this says you can't do this. This guarantees landlords a profit. It says that you can raise rents up to 15% a year, right, on an annual basis. So it's not like putting a freeze on rents. It's saying you can raise rents, but you can't rent gouge. You can't take advantage of the housing shortage. California has the highest rents in the country. It has the most homeless people in the country. People can't afford to buy homes in California because they can't afford to save any money because they're paying, about a third of all the renters in California pay over half of their income just to put a roof over their head. And so Prop 21 would give local governments the permission to have rent control if they wanted to, and it would not allow them to have rent control on buildings built in the last 15 years, but it's a rolling number. So every year that 15-year number gets 1 year further. So it doesn't impose rent control on new construction, but it imposes rent control. It can allow cities to impose rent control on more housing. It exempts single-family homeowners and people that own 2 single-family homes. So it's not going to hurt people. It's not going to say if you want to rent out your garage or you want to build a unit in the backyard, it's sometimes called a granny flat or an in-law apartment or an auxiliary apartment. There won't be rent control on that. But if you and the people that are opposing this and who are spending hundreds of millions of dollars are the big corporate landlords like Blackstone and Essex. These are not names that most voters know about, but this is the hidden power structure of the real estate industry. These are Wall Street funded big corporate landlords that own hundreds and hundreds of units, like Jeff Palmer in Los Angeles, who's the biggest landlord in Los Angeles. He owns personally 5 homes, right? And he's a billionaire. He's the biggest funder of Donald Trump, right? And people like him are behind this kind of stuff.
Wow.
And so this is not going to hurt mom and pop landlords. This is really to help working families who are now spending, 30, 40, 50, 60, even 70% of their incomes on housing, on rent. And let me add one thing that I think is really important as a part of this. This is pro-business.
Yeah.
Because if you are spending most of your income to pay the rent, you can't spend it in the grocery store. You can't
There it
spend it at the clothing store. You can't go to the movies. You can't go to restaurants. So this takes people's money that's now going to their greedy landlords and the landlords that are funded by by banks and corporations. And it says, take that money and spend it in the local economy. So Pasadena would be a lot better off if it had rent control, because people would have more money to spend in the restaurants and the stores in Pasadena, and that would help our local economy. So this doesn't require Pasadena to pass rent control, but I'm hoping that in the next year or two, particularly if this passes, that there will be a movement in Pasadena sponsored by Pasadena's Organizing for Progress and the POP and the Pasadena Tenants Union and other people of conscience to say to the landlords in Pasadena who are really gouging people right now. It's no accident that the African-American population in Pasadena, for example, has been declining because they're being pushed out by high rents.
Yeah.
And why are the public schools in Pasadena losing people? Because families with kids are being pushed out of Pasadena because of high rents. So this would stabilize. If we had rent control in Pasadena, it would stabilize our community and help families. But Prop 21 doesn't require Pasadena or any other city to do that. It just makes it possible if they want.
Right. 22. That's the one we see all the ads on. 22.
Big one.
Right? Drivers want it. Drivers don't want it. I don't know what's going on. I absolutely don't. I talked to a driver today, as a matter of fact, who was saying that, it may look like drivers want it, but, there's a lot of propaganda going on right now. When they pick up a fare, before they can accept the fare, or not when they pick it up, but when they pick up the app, and before they can accept the fare, they have to say, yes, I'm 22. I mean, what is that all about? So what is the truth here? I mean, I can see both sides. I really can. And I know that there are people that, want that gig job and need it. And I get all of that. And they don't feel abused. But on the other hand, I'm an old union guy.
Yeah.
And I'm an old union guy. And, I see workers being taken advantage of. That's what I see. So what is the truth? And we don't have a lot of time, so let's try to hold this to about 2 minutes if we can.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I took something called driver's ed. And I've been educated by drivers in the last couple of months about this proposition. Because I did the same thing you did. I've talked to some Uber and Lyft drivers and people for Postmates and DoorDash. It's very simple. It's very simple. Under current California law, drivers for these gig companies, particularly Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and Postmates, they have rights. They have rights to, under California law, to have paid family leave, to have workman's compensation, to have medical insurance, health insurance, to organize a union if they want, and other basic workers' rights that have been are embodied in our culture. And as you can imagine, DoorDash and Lyft and Uber and Postmates, they don't want their employees to have these rights. And so they want to take these rights away from them. And that's what this does. This says if this passes, it will mean that the drivers for these companies are no longer called employees with the rights of employees, but instead you're self-employed independent contractor, right? And so you're not entitled to sick pay or anything like that, right? And so these companies, there's only 4 big ones, right? Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, and Postmates.
Why isn't Grubhub part of this, or are they?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But they've already spent over $120 million to put this on the ballot and to try to miseducate us, drivers' miseducation by these companies. And so this is, a pretty basic human rights, workers' rights issue, where if you vote yes, you're taking rights away from working people. And if you vote no, you're telling DoorDash and Uber and Lyft, you've got to treat your workers, your employees, with respect and dignity. And you've got to under the law. It's pretty basic. And so their commercials, of course, don't say, vote for this so that the owners of Uber and Lyft can make more money or get bigger profits or buy bigger houses. They're basically, they found a bunch of actors or maybe some drivers. Maybe they're paying some of their drivers to go to make television commercials that say, this is going to hurt me. It's going to hurt my job.
But the sad truth, Peter, is that a lot of actors are drivers. So that's because it's hard enough to make a business living as an actor. So a lot of them are drivers.
Okay. But
the
commercial.
But I think, I'm going to kind of say this, and I agree with everything that you said, and I'm leaning toward voting no on 22. But I also need to say that I think that AB 5 has to be fixed. I think it goes way too far because it does affect people who are in different kinds of positions, people that are more consultant position, and it's gone too far. Now, I think it should probably apply to drivers, but I'm not sure. For example, they had to get an exception for musicians. They had to get an exception for writers because they were saying that, musicians who had a garage band were suddenly employers or employees. And that's simply not true. So someone's got to look at the real world and figure that out. Go ahead,
Barry,
Dre.
can I chime in? Well,
Yeah.
in AB 5, for example, when I was at the Pasadena Weekly, Justin Chapman, Bliss Bowen, anybody who was doing more than 30 articles a year, suddenly the Weekly would have fired them or stopped using them because the Weekly would have to hire them. So some people are.
Right.
Right. I'm just talking about AB 5.
You're right.
I'm just talking about AB 5. I'm talking about fixing AB 5.
But I think there are people that think that if you vote for this, it'll help AB 5. It won't. It only deals with this one thing. So
particularly in a pandemic.
Right.
In a pandemic, workers' rights are really essential.
I agree.
Paramount. I agree.
So, Dre, take us out with JOP. Go for it.
All right,
especially O and P, because I know you've been doing some work on those.
I'm going to do O and P. I'm not high on. I don't know anything about J. So
that's fine. All right.
Do O and P.
Look up J, people. Look it up. We're not.
If somebody wants to jump in on that after we do O and P, that's fine.
Okay, go ahead, because we only got about 2 minutes. So
$500 million facilities bond for the PUSD.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this does not go this does not go to salaries. This strictly goes to infrastructure, of buildings and things like that.
Right.
Completely necessary.
Technology, right? Too.
Technology. Some of our school buildings are over 100 years old. Yep. Keep that in mind.
Yep.
So this is a necessity. Look, kids can't learn if the building's falling down around them. Let's just be honest.
That's right.
Some of them, there's asbestos in some of the ceilings still, from what I've been told. We got to bring them up to date. It's as simple as that. And now is the time to do it. When the students aren't there, we can get some of this construction done. We can get some of the work done. Yes, it will raise property taxes, but look, if we're not, the thing we need to raise property taxes over is the schools. Okay, we have got to pay for public education. It's as simple as that.
Okay. Well said.
Anybody want to chime in? All right.
No, I appreciate that.
We have time to just say vote yes on eliminating bail.
Yeah. Yeah, let's eliminate bail.
All right.
So that's 25. We're not going to have time to talk about dialysis, but because that's another one where there are doctors on both sides. I can't.
And I'll jump in on P. And then P very quickly.
Oh, jump in on P. Yeah.
P guarantees that the annual $18 million transfer from the city's utility continues to go to the general fund. It does not create a new tax. It does not raise fees. That transfer has been going on. I mean, it's been passed 7 times. Let's put it like that. The city council or the city now takes it to the voters because somebody is attempting to file a lawsuit over it, which is the only reason it's coming to the voters now. So it's essential, pays for fire, police, first responders, all of those things. If that $18 million goes away, there will be a massive reduction in service in the city.
Thank you, Dre. So yes on O, yes on P. I'm going to say yes on J because it channels money also to the homeless, to mental health, to all kinds of good places. Come on, people, we're a progressive state. Let's vote progressively. That's what we need to do. So thank you so much, Peter Dreier from Occidental College. It just is a joy to have you here. You know so much, and you're so passionate, and you're such a great advocate, and I really appreciate it. Next week, we may do another hour. We're not sure, but we are looking at possibly doing that and wrapping up this freaking election because it's time for you guys to decide what's going to happen. And frankly, most of you or a lot of you have already voted. If you haven't, go vote. Go read this if you haven't voted yet and know what you're doing. And that's it for us. So for Peter Dreier, I'm Barry Gordon.
I'm Andre Coleman.
This has been NewsRap live at 5. See you next week.